Can Halloween be rebooted? I started thinking about this after considering the Rob Zombie 2007 film and also the fact that we're apparently getting a Halloween TV show that's going to ignore everything except the original movie, which I cannot understand the logic of making a continuation of a film from almost 40 years ago with almost all of the actors in it now either deceased or no longer acting. It's dumb. It's stupid. But I also thought about how when Halloween's reboot came out 2007, a lot of people did not like it. If they were okay with it, they thought it was unnecessary, unneeded, etc. And it makes sense. The original Halloween, regardless of my own feelings towards it, is considered this cult classic and, very well received by critics. So you have to ask yourself, what way could a reboot for Halloween even feasibly be something that is considered worthwhile? I thought about it for a long time. I said maybe we could have it to where you get those same basic story beats of, like Michael breaking out of, Haddonfield's clinic, Smith's Grove, and then heading over to Haddonfield and Loomis chasing after him. And then something similar to the original film, but just kind of maybe in a different sequence where the film starts with Michael already stalking and then you get the flashbacks of his original kill of his sister. That might be one way to go about doing this. But I kept asking myself, is this different enough to justify its own existence? And the only way I've seen a reboot done in recent years, or just in any kind of period where I would say, hey, this is actually something I quite enjoy, even if it is supposed to just be the same thing again, is the Friday the 13th reboot from 2009, which wasn't just a retelling of the first movie. It took elements from the first, I'd say 3 or 4 films and just kind of all mashed them together. But would Halloween really be the type of movie that could sustain having, because each film has a different year of Halloween where Michael goes around killing people. And I really don't see where you could do something like that with that premise. Now, what I would rather have, what I would prefer they do, is something similar to Superman Returns, where you treat the first Halloween as like this, I don't want to call it the gold standard, but you basically make a sequel to it that just simply recast the original actors with people who are extremely similar in both voice and physical appearance. Like Halloween Kills did this with Loomis, right? You get someone that looks like Donald Pleasance, someone that can mimic the voice very well, which we do have, voice actors. Same thing with Jamie Lee Curtis, where you get an actress that looks like her from 78, and then someone who sounds similar to her voice. And from there, you can make a film set 2 years after the first movie, 3 years after the first movie. Hell, you can even make an interquel. We could have a movie that's set in between Halloween 2 and H2O. That kind of like, it doesn't have to directly adapt the comics that came out, but just sort of, these are the examples where you could still have something that is essentially a reboot, but then not entirely. Like, that the first movie did take place in this timeline, right? That's why they still tell you to go back and watch it. But all of those same characters, even the recast, are still following the events of that original movie. That's an idea I think has a lot more staying power than just, hey, let's tell the story of the original movie that everybody knows. Because at a certain point, the origins of the various horror villains, right? It's kind of like how with the superhero movies, they're like, why would we want to see, Spider-Man get bit by the spider for the 3rd time, or the Fantastic Four get their powers for the 3rd time. At a certain point, these origins become so done over and over, or just so ingrained in us that we don't want to see it again. Like, I would rather have a Halloween movie that is set, again, in the Superman Returns type way, where it acknowledges that the first film happened, but maybe it's 2 years later, 3 years later. Laurie's lost all her friends. She's, devastated. Because a lot of the criticisms of H2, one of the criticisms, I should say, besides the sibling angle, was that there was no character development because it takes place immediately after the first film. So in doing it this way, you could have an alternate sequel to Halloween 1 that is able to pick up off of that original movie, but then, give some amount of time to where she could have changed in between installments or have processed what happened to her from there. And this is, I think, a really novel approach where you just basically take that atmosphere, that look of the first movie or any other movie that you want to make a sequel to, and just kind of try to go off of this. I mean, even with people who like still hold out a flame for, as an example, making a sequel to Resurrection or uh, some other, some other film, because of the amount of time that passes, it's like, you really want to see, this actor 20, 30 years older than the last, because at a certain point, it just doesn't feel like it's the same person, even if it is. Because, I mean, just by the natural happenstance of so much time passing, their appearance changes fairly drastically. I mean, look at Liv Taylor, right? She played Betty Ross in the Incredible Hulk 2008 film, and then they finally brought her back for a second appearance earlier this year with Captain America 4, and she's, again, this isn't an insult to her appearance, but it's been such a long amount of time that it just doesn't feel like the same character. You're not invested anymore, and that's why I said if they went with this approach, you could have, Halloween 1, right, came out in 78, and then you have your own version of Halloween 2 that comes out this year or next year. But again, it's all of these actors who are purposefully trying as hard as they can to mimic the mannerisms and appearances of that cast from the first movie, so that if you want to make a sequel to your film, it can feel a lot more organic, because that cast from, your sequel now has a year or two in between their performances and can, feasibly keep up these looks and impressions for the next couple of years. And that way you would be able to almost, and it's not even a thing of just like saying that it's not possible to reboot Halloween. Obviously it is possible to make a reboot, right? We had one in 2007, but it's your way of saying, why make something, why try to replace something that people consider a classic, right? Why try to put yourself in this almost impossible position of being equal to or usurping something that people swear is either one of the greatest horror films or greatest films of all time? Like, why even bother with that when it's a lot more conceivable that you could try and make your own sequel? Sequels have a lot less praise to them, that could possibly be on par or even better than much of what came after the first movie. So that's my 2 cents. I think a straight up reboot is something they can do in terms of it's, they're allowed to, it's legal, but it's going to be another one of those things where the more attempts they make at it, you're just going to have people saying this is not as good as what kicked off all these films to begin with. And that's why I said, for me, the better alternative is just taking the look of the first movie, of the characters, of the setting, and getting look-alike actors, sound-alike voice actors to make sequels that carry on the continuity of that first film, even if it's an entirely different cast, because they're mimicking that look and appearance so much that it almost feels like this could have been made, 20, 30 years ago, back when these people looked and sounded that way.